Well, hello and welcome to Virtual Vintage. This is albeit a temporary replacement for our speed trials that we normally have at Grimsthorpe, and we thought it'd be a good idea to essentially share with you some interesting features, all loosely based around vintage cars and our love of vintage cars and all things pre-war. And later on I'm going to be speaking to my friend Colin, who I'll introduce to you, and we're going to be looking around this fabulous Q-Type we have in front of us.
Models, all that race under 39. Custom 7 Ulster.
Perhaps, Richard, you could tell me a bit about how the concept of speed trials started. You know, where did it start and when did it start, and what sort of people were taking part in those early days?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting history. It's an interesting aspect of motorsport history. The whole thing about speed trials and you know, being a company that set itself up with that in the title, it's only fitting that we should know something about its history and how it all came about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So vintage speed trials, obviously we had an event, and sort of the basis of speed trials were almost, in the early days, a reliability trial. They were almost set up by manufacturers to prove their latest sort of cars or motorbikes. And initially, we're starting in about 1904. So in the Edwardian period, we're starting with cars beginning to become falling into the owners, sort of the ownership of sort of mostly, to be frank, the lords and ladies and wealthy members of society who have cars for the first time. They're unable to use them at speed on public roads. So they're desperate for an opportunity to show off their new cars and have a go. And very often these little events started off on private land, much the same, to be authentic, much the same as we're doing. We're doing it on an estate road at Grimsthorpe. And this is where speed trials would have taken place in the Edwardian period. This is 1904. Places like Brooklands, a circuit track, was opening around 1906. So the idea of circuit racing was a later sort of modification to motorsport. And initially, these speed trials were just a straight half a mile or a straight mile, starting at one point, ending at another, and then timing in between. And there was a degree of handicapping. I mean, how fair it was, I don't know, but it certainly was. That was the principle of it. So a speed trial was simply a starting at point A and going as fast as you can to point B.
Yeah. So you say the sort of lords and ladies. What sort of people could afford cars, and what sort of people were taking part in these things?
Well, these were very much wealthy landowners, magistrates, solicitors. We're getting this from the list of programmes, and a lot of, funny enough, one of the little anachronisms of the early days were the owners were often subcontracting the driving to their handymen or their chauffeurs or their gardeners, because the names that were listed on the programmes weren't always the names of the owners, but of course they were always there to receive the cup. They were there when the honours were being handed out.
I think you'd said in the past that sometimes some of the university, Oxford or Cambridge students were taking part. Yes, there was inter-varsity competition, very much on the first site that we started at, Syston Park near Grantham. This was Oxford competing against Cambridge I think it was a biannual basis. They had one in the March and they had one in the June or July, and essentially they were competing against each other and seeing which undergraduate had the deepest pockets and could afford the most powerful car. So I can imagine. And over what sort of period of time did it extend? Did it kind of peter out eventually, or turn into circuit racing? Or?
Well, the 1920s, 1930s were probably the high spot in early speed trials, reliability trials. Yeah. They were taking place across the country, sometimes in the form of a short hill climb. There's a famous track in the south of England called Cop Hill, which is a famous sort of where a speed trial was taking place at sort of up an incline, and essentially they were all having a go during the 20s and 30s, and it. Come the sort of Second World War, obviously, there was a break in proceedings. Yeah. By this time, circuit racing had established itself as the more sort of attractive venues.
The go-to sport.
Yeah, the Brooklands and the Donington Parks and etc. were coming on stream big time in the late 30s.
Yeah.
So
amazing that we got this fantastic legacy of all the cars and things as a result of those early trials.
It is. I mean, a lot of the technologies and the developments that took place particularly between the undergraduates. I mean, these were undergraduates who had both the resources financially and also the desire to sort of compete at a serious level. I mean, some of the competitors that we found out on the historical information that we were researching into the previous venue we had the speed trial. I mean, it was like a real who's who list of prominent drivers of the period, actually, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, so one thing I'd like to know, Richard, is what's the story? How did you come by the Q-type over there?
Well, it was an amazing piece of luck, really, to be fair. Last year, I went to a racetrack near Paris and with a friend, just to visit and experience him. He was competing, and I was ferreting amongst my natural home, Autojumble. It was great in France.
Brilliant.
So I happened upon. Sounds like a fairy tale, really. It is a little bit for me, but. Happened upon this stall, and on the front was a rather bedraggled Q-type, the car in the background. We have some pictures of it in the state in which I discovered it.
Oh, right.
And essentially, it was being put up for sale by the owner because I think he didn't have the time. He didn't have the time to invest in getting it back onto the track. And one quite practical point is that he told me, a chap called Steve Richardson owned it before me, and he struggled to actually physically fit in the car because it's quite tight.
Yeah.
So without being able to drive it, I think he lost the momentum, and he was looking to sell it at the Autojumble in France. I don't know how many people sort of had looked at it and kicked the tyres and sort of wondered, but I saw it, I registered it. My previous sort of knowledge of, we talked earlier about Syston Park speed trials.
Yes.
And Kenneth Evans raced this Q-type at Syston, and I had in the back of my mind this picture of this car and couldn't quite believe what I was seeing in front of me.
I can imagine.
Initially, like sort of most people, I thought, well, hang on, this is too good to be true. Is it a copy? Is it something that has been put together as a special, etc.? I did my research very quickly when I came back home to England after the event, and a good friend of mine who's actually being featured later on in our programme, Walter Heel, he actually was given the task of selling the car on the open market. He put it up on Instagram, and I messaged him very quickly and said, Walter, please tell me the price quickly so I can go out and take out a second mortgage and buy it from you.
Yes.
And that's basically what happened. And it sort of the car, was quickly brought up to Lincolnshire, and it was featured in our speed trial. It was just in time for our speed trial that we held in August.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, and it was a display there. And in the meantime, in the interim, we've been getting it ready to go onto the track in 2021. So a labour of love, really.
Yeah.
But the thread that links all this together is, of course, this amazing coincidence that we come across this racetrack or this speed trial venue in Lincolnshire, and this is the very venue where I think it was only the first or the second time out that this car had in the single seater form was at this very event. And then roll forward, many years, and here the car is, sort of with that link between the two. Us having discovered the venue, and now we have a car that was actually used at the speed trial.
Yeah.
So amazing bit of luck, really, to find that, and I think it's definitely a keeper. It's not something
absolutely.
Will ever,
you're not going to get
ever
not
part
going anywhere soon, is it?
No.
Well, looking forward to seeing it again in action next year.
Yes. Yeah.
And finally, how did you yourself get involved in speed trials?
Well, it is a long story, but essentially, I was always, sort of very taken with initially classic cars, and then cars of the pre-war period. Sort of, I came into contact with more the VSCC, the Vintage Sports Car Club. We're having events at Cadwell, not far away, and it really is a sort of visceral sensation when you go to one of these meetings. The smells and the sounds of these cars, and you really felt as if you can wander around the pits and you can look at the cars and look at the mechanical sort of integrity of them very closely. And I was taken by it all, and I was speaking to a friend, and I said, well, it would be fantastic to be able to have even a small event where we gathered together some of these guys, albeit not on a track, but just on a small piece of road, and we could have some fun. So essentially, both that and the history that we discovered that had previously been, I wouldn't say it hadn't been discovered, it was well documented, but it was disparate. I mean, it was all over the place, and we having sort of looked into it closely, we found that there was a lot in there, and we were uncovering names like Raymond Mays and sort of all the sort of cognoscenti of the pre-war world was all interesting to me. So I wasn't, far from it. I wasn't an event organizer, but with a support of colleagues and just some enthusiasm, just got involved and found myself running a sort of an event. And it's been really interesting. And this year, of course, has been a challenge with the fact that we've had to postpone our event. But to be quite honest, it's given us the opportunity to take stock and concentrate on doing something like this. And my own car in the background has taken precedence over this time. So it's been interesting.
Well, that's great, and of course we're all really looking forward to seeing it happen again next year in 2021.
2021, exactly. I mean, there's certainly going to be some very well fettled cars with all the lockdown activity that I've been witnessing on Instagram, where people have been taking their restorations to the nth level, which is great. There's going to be all these beautifully presented cars, and they're all going to be desperate to take part in an event. So we can fulfil that need, and we'll sort of be, as soon as circumstances sort of change a little and we're allowed to go back to Grimsthorpe, we're going to start planning 2021 in anger, really. So
brilliant. Thanks very much.